This is Nightly Business Report with Tyler Matheson and Sue Herrera.
Fragile Union, how today's terror attacks in Brussels threaten the European Union and the global economy.
Airports on alert, what our government is doing to keep a key transportation hub here safe.
And thanks anyway. The FBI may have found a way into the iPhone used by one of the San Bernardino terrorists, halting for now its months-long fight with Apple. All that and more tonight on Nightly Business Report for Tuesday, March 22nd.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Brussels, Belgium. It's the de facto capital of the European Union. It is where NATO is headquartered. It is where companies like Amazon and Microsoft and Google's parent company, Alphabet, are increasing their presence. And today, it's where explosions hit. The Islamic State claimed responsibility for bombings at the country's main airport and a subway station that killed more than 30 and resulted in scores of injuries. This is the fourth attack in Europe in 4 months. Security has been heightened across the continent. Travel and transportation, a key pillar of modern economies, disrupted. And all of this comes as the European economy struggles to recover and continues to feel the pressure caused by the migrant crisis. Hadley Gamble joins us now from Brussels. Good evening, Hadley. What's the latest?
Good evening, Sue. So right now, Brussels is a city that is subdued. It's a city that is questioning the leadership, not just in Brussels itself, but also, of course, Belgium and the European Union. Basically, what we saw earlier today were some serious coordinated attacks. We understand that right now, Belgian police are searching for a man that they believe is connected with the attacks that left as many as 30 people dead and hundreds wounded. Earlier today, of course, we understand that he was caught. His image was caught on CCTV just moments before the first two explosions at Brussels International Airport. And the Belgian police are asking for anyone to come forward with his whereabouts and possible identity. And of course, right now behind me, as you can see, we're just steps away from the Malbec metro station, the area where the third explosion took place later in the morning. And that area is still cordoned off, is just down the street from the center of European politics, the European Parliament and the European Council buildings, where these ministers go to meetings every single day. So this is really striking at the very heart of Europe.
Hadley, are raids ongoing so far as you can tell? And I gather there are some complications having to do with Belgian law about whether raids can be prosecuted after certain hours of the day.
That's right, Tyler. If you can see behind me, this is a city that is almost asleep as well as being subdued. You have to remember, of course, that this is Europe. This is a place where hours are strictly adhered to, and also jurisdictions as well. So these raids, we know that they're ongoing, but at the same point, as you mentioned, whether or not the prosecutions will follow in swiftly is a bigger question. Of course, the other question for the Belgian Prime Minister, many people coming out today and being critical, asking what's happening next. He's come out with some strong statements. He's tweeted that this is a country that's going to continue to defend its values, that they're not going to be subject to these barbaric attacks. But at the same point, many people now questioning whether or not the leadership here at the heart of Europe is really ready to take this threat on.
Now, Hadley, I know that in the late afternoon, one of those raids produced yet another explosive device and some chemicals, leading some to speculate that perhaps other incidents were planned. Do we have any clarity on that yet?
There hasn't been much clarity on that so far, Sue, but we do understand, of course, that this is not something that was beyond the pale. Belgian officials, even over the weekend, after they were able to secure the third brother, they were involved in the Paris attacks. They said, the Belgian Prime Minister himself saying that another attack was probable. I think that this just really does speak to the level of insecurity that is happening right now amongst all of the different security services, not just here in Belgium, but also across Europe and in the United States. They really just don't know what's going to happen next.
Hadley, let me ask you just a little bit about the fact that in Brussels and in Belgium, there are lots of different jurisdictions, and there has been some criticism about how well or not well they communicate on police operations and share intelligence. What can you tell us?
That's correct. And you have to remember, of course, that this is a country that, as we say, is at the heart of the European Union. And as such, this is a country that speaks several different languages. They're speaking English, they're speaking French, they're speaking Flemish. And of course, many of the folks that they're trying to infiltrate their cells, especially those that they believe have ties to the Islamic State, they're speaking Arabic. So not only do you have different jurisdictions, but you also have so many different languages, barriers to communication, and certainly to intelligence sharing as well.
All right, Hadley, thank you so much. Hadley Gamble for us live in Brussels. Ty?
Today's terror attacks reverberated across Europe and shook the foundations of the European Union. The assaults came just weeks ahead of a vote in Britain on whether the UK will remain in the EU. Here to discuss the stakes and the global impact of today's violence is David Malpass, president and founder of his own economic research firm, Ensima Global. David, always great to see you. I want to make distinctions between the EU on the one hand and the currency, the common currency, the euro, on another. Let's talk first about the European Union. Does this weaken or temporarily strengthen the European Union?
Hi. Well, it's a tragedy, and I think at first people pull together and they try to make some sense out of it and make some direction out of it. But that over time, the countries are being forced more and more to look out for themselves. You know, they have to act in their own self-interest. So I think this is part of the European Union's decline, not necessarily the Euros, but the European Union. It's a trade union where they're supposed to have open borders and allow investment and trade to flow among them, and that becomes very difficult in this kind of situation.
So, David, does it heighten the odds that the June vote in Britain about whether to stay part of the Union or not sides with those who want to exit the EU?
I think it makes it hard to win that vote to stay in the European Union. So Britain's going to vote yes or no. And the problem is this kind of attack focuses the British opinion on the risk of Brussels, the expense of Brussels. You know, the UK has been subsidizing to an extent the European Union. And it also focuses on the bureaucratic nature of Europe. That previous report that you had on discussed how hard it is for Europe to cooperate among itself. So if you're sitting in Britain, you look at it and say, you know, we'd be better off without that. I'm worried that that's what's going to happen.
Are these attacks, as you sit and look at them, an attack on the European Union per se? In other words, the people who claim responsibility for this say this attack was in retribution for Belgium's support of and participation in raids that targeted ISIS in the Middle East, in Syria, and so forth. France, the same thing. Attack us, we're going to come attack you. Stay out, and we won't bother you, as would be the case in countries that have not participated in that.
Well, I think that's the hope of radical Islam. That's one of the war techniques, to scare the opponent into inaction. And so certainly their hope in Europe is that the countries will freeze and respond that way. You know, Europe is in a weak position for this because they haven't had much of a defense budget, and they also don't have unity on what to do about the refugee inflow. This is a giant human catastrophe of the flow of refugees that want to come into Europe and the expense of it. So Europe's got multiple problems to deal with. And what's the right thing to do, and how do you pay for it?
And quickly, David, what about doing business in Europe? This is the fourth attack in 4 months, and they were not small attacks by any means. Does it deter U.S. companies or other companies from around the world from doing business in Europe? What's the economic global impact?
It does deter. You know, world growth has been so weak that you may not notice the deterioration. So the bigger issue is in the long run. Over the next 10, 20 years, there won't be enough investment. And I'm worried at some point the euro itself might come under attack, which would be a catastrophe for the world, really, if it began breaking up.
You just answered my last question, which was going to be quick on the euro. So you think it puts pressure on it. Very quickly, do you think it will ultimately survive or not?
You know, it depends on leadership. They've got to make a choice of how to defend it. The reason it's so dangerous is debt is denominated in euros.
Right.
So if you begin to devalue, then the whole thing unravels. I think they'll protect it as long as they can, the euro.
And that kind of unraveling would be a real mess, as you point out. David Malpass with Ensima Global. Thanks.
Thanks to both.
President Obama today condemned the bombings in Brussels. Speaking in Cuba, the president urged international unity in the fight against terror.
The thoughts and the prayers of the American people are with the people of Belgium, and we stand in solidarity with them in condemning these outrageous attacks against innocent people. We will do whatever is necessary to support our friend and ally Belgium in bringing to justice those who are responsible.
President Obama called the Belgian Prime Minister to offer his condolences and support, saying the U.S. would stand alongside the EU and NATO in defeating terrorism.
On Wall Street, the trading action today was muted, shaking off somewhat the news out of Brussels. Stocks opened slightly lower, then climbed to break-even midday, and they ended mixed. At the close, the Dow Jones Industrials fell 41 to 17,582, snapping its 7-day advance. The Nasdaq was up 12, the S&P 500 down nearly 2. Investors did buy up safe haven assets such as gold, which saw prices rise in the wake of those terror attacks. And today, one group of stocks garnered particular interest. Bob Pisani reports from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange.
The attacks in Belgium have again focused attention on airlines and travel stocks. Airline stocks in Europe and the U.S. were down roughly 2%, as were cruise lines like Royal Caribbean and travel sites like Priceline. But the truth is that so far, terror attacks have had only a very limited short-term effect on the global equity markets. Now, historically, stocks tend to dip on the day of the event and then rise just a few days later. A similar effect was seen with other terror attacks. Some stocks, like the company that runs the Paris airport, took a bit longer to recover, but overall, even airline stocks quickly went back to performing roughly in line with the overall market. Now, airline and travel stocks did underperform in January and February, but they underperformed because of concerns about a recession slowing down travel, not on terrorist concerns. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Bob Pisani at the New York Stock Exchange.
A flight from Brussels that took off just minutes before the attack inside the airport landed safely in Orlando. According to local news reports, there was no announcement on the flight about the attacks, and the passengers did not have Wi-Fi. They were told of the bombing when a caravan of law enforcement officials met them on the tarmac. The Orlando airport wasn't the only one to increase security measures. Airports across the country were on heightened alert. Mary Thompson reports tonight from Newark International Airport in Newark, New Jersey.
In an all-too-familiar pattern, terrorists strike abroad, and in U.S. cities like New York, officials prep for the worst.
Expect to see extraordinary NYPD presence out over the coming days as a sign of our readiness to protect people at all times.
At Newark Liberty Airport, stepped-up security very visible following the attacks in Brussels. Their travelers showed little concern about a similar attack at home.
I thought there might be more delays in security, but I feel pretty safe here.
I'm a seasoned traveler, so you have to do what you have to do. Yeah, so I'll be okay.
United Airlines and Delta rerouting flights to Belgium, where FlightAware says over 400 of them in and out of the Brussels airport were canceled Tuesday. Travelers saying while the attacks won't impact their domestic travel plans, they would if they were traveling abroad.
I wouldn't want to put myself in that position too soon.
I wouldn't go to countries that are currently having problems.
For travelers in trouble, American Airlines offering refunds if their plans were impacted. Meanwhile, hotel operator Marriott offering to waive cancellation fees for their 4 properties in Brussels. Businesses and travelers becoming too familiar with making quick adjustments to terrible circumstances. At Newark Liberty Airport in Newark, New Jersey, I'm Mary Thompson for Nightly Business Report.
Following today's attacks, a number of U.S. wireless carriers waived their fees for calls and texts to and from Belgium. AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, Sprint, all offering free service for those trying to communicate with friends and family in that country. Separately, Facebook activated its safety check for users located in Brussels. The safety check automatically sends your status to friends in the form of a notification that you are safe.
A court hearing between Apple and the FBI was canceled today after the government revealed that a third-party hacker may be able to unlock the encrypted iPhone used by one of the terrorists in the San Bernardino terror attack, which could also ultimately eliminate Apple from creating a backdoor entry. Are we relieved or not that the government has found another way? Joining us to talk about that and get his take is Paul Violas, CEO of his own security firm, Violas International. Paul, welcome. Nice to have you here.
Thank you, Sue.
If this is indeed the case, if there is a third party, what's your reaction to that development?
Well, I have to tell you, Sue, if in fact this is correct and they have found someone that can help them unlock the key to get intelligence out of that phone, then, I'm delighted about that. I think that's fantastic.
Why?
Well, because we need the information, Tyler. At the end of the day, this is why this is such a unique situation, because this is not an example of the FBI looking to have an intelligence gathering exercise. This is a part of a criminal investigation post a terrorist attack where 14 people were killed on American soil. So in order for us to get information from this phone, if it's a third party, whoever it is, it's critical for us to have that information so we know who was involved in that attack and also if other attacks are being planned.
Does the incident today in Brussels and the arrest on Friday of one of the terror suspects in Paris, who reportedly used encrypted messages to communicate with his cell, does it strengthen the argument that Silicon Valley needs to cooperate more with law enforcement authorities?
It really does, but also I think we have to be prudent here. You know, this isn't a full court press against Apple or against, corporate America, because we live in a capitalistic society. We expect people to be able to do well and to profit, but there has to be a level of measurement and balance. And part of the problem here, when we talk about encryption, is, yes, we want people to feel that their communications are safe and private, but by the same token, we have to lay that line in the sand, Sue, so that we clearly understand that in cases like this, levels of encryption are fine on the privacy side, but nothing will ever supersede us being able to protect people at home. End of story.
Let's say, Paul, that the Justice Department succeeds in breaking into this particular phone or developing some sort of key that enables it to get into other similarly encrypted phones.
Right.
Aren't we going to sooner or later find ourselves back in exactly this situation? Because isn't Apple then going to respond by a new and presumably more difficult to break form of encryption?
Absolutely, Tyler. You're 100% on point. I mean, let's look at this, right? Apple has some of the most brilliant minds in the world that have over 100,000 employees. So if, in fact, this comes to fruition and the FBI has secured a source that can get into this particular phone, you can bet that Apple will find a way to add different encryption, a different key going forward. There's no question about that.
Paul, thank you very much for your perspective. We appreciate it. Paul
Always
Violas,
a pleasure. Thank you.
with Violas International. Ty?
And shares ahead, still ahead. Shares of Nike have been on a long run. So what tripped them up in the most recent quarter? We'll take a look after this.
A revenue miss for Dow component Nike. The world's largest activewear maker said a strong dollar hurt sales in Europe and emerging markets like Brazil and Mexico. The company reported earnings of 55 cents per share. That was better than the estimate of 48 cents. Revenue of a little bit more than $8 billion was weaker than expected, but 7% better than a year ago. Investors weren't all that happy with that revenue number, pressuring shares initially after the report. Sarah Eisen takes a closer look at Nike's quarterly results.
It was a mixed quarter for Nike. Profit came in much better than expected, but it was that overall sales number that came in light. Two weak spots, China coming in a bit less than analysts were expecting, and Western Europe as well. And the common theme here could be the stronger U.S. dollar chipping away at Nike sales. Nike says sales grew 8% from a year ago, but that number would have been 14% higher if you take out how much those sales were dinged by the stronger U.S. dollar. As far as the outlook ahead, Nike's particularly bullish about its prospects in China. Nike gives futures orders to investors a look forward a few months for the lead-in to the Summer Olympics. It says that in China, those orders are set to grow 36%. Keep in mind, Nike has been a high-flying stock, outperforming the S&P 500 this year and over the last 12 months, so it was priced for a very good quarter. That miss on sales could have an impact on the stock. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Sarah Eisen.
A warm winter drags down sales for G3 apparel, and that is where we begin tonight's market focus. The seller of brands such as Calvin Klein and Levi's saw its shares tumble after it reported quarterly profit and revenue below analyst targets. The CEO said lower sales in outerwear drove those weak results. Now, the company plans to reduce its outerwear offerings next year. G3 also issued guidance for the year. It came in below expectations, and as you might expect, shares of G3 fell sharply, more than 19% to 44.52. Shares of Acorn surged today after the drug maker posted its 2015 results and 2016 guidance. Last year, the company said it would restate its 2014 financials after it identified accounting errors. The company plans to file the report with the Securities and Exchange Commission by May. Shares surged more than 40% to $26.32. And the security software company Symantec initiated its $1 billion accelerated share buyback program part of the company's $5.5 billion capital return plan. Symantec, though, down fractionally to $18.82. And lumber liquidators paid the California Air Resources Board $2.5 million in an agreement to settle allegations that the flooring company's products contain formaldehyde above permitted levels. Under the agreement, the company will also practice certain compliance procedures to ensure its products meet the regulators' requirements. Shares soared 16% to $13.94.
General Electric is exploring potential business opportunities in Cuba. The company has signed memorandums of understanding with the Cuban government, expressing interest in one day selling aviation, medical, and power products in that country. Shares of General Electric fell fractionally to $31.06. Beginning in May, Carnival will offer cruises from the U.S. to Cuba, making it the first U.S. cruise company to provide travel between the two countries. The Carnival CEO said there is huge demand among U.S. travelers to see the Caribbean country, and the company will offer cruises every other week. Shares fell 2% to $48.75. Discount chain Five Below topped both earnings and sales estimates for its latest quarter and saw a more than 3% rise in comparable store sales. However, the company issued weaker than expected outlook for the year. Shares initially fell in after-hours trading, the stock ending the regular session down more than 1% to $38.89.
The Supreme Court today sided with thousands of workers at Tyson Foods. As we reported earlier, the employees sought to recover overtime pay. Tyson Foods challenged the nearly $6 million class action judgment, but in a 6-2 vote, the 2014 decision was upheld.
The FDA says it is requiring new, stronger warnings about the risk of addiction, abuse, and overdose for short-acting opioid pain medications. That decision is seen as a step towards addressing and curbing the epidemic of narcotic use in the U.S. The FDA commissioner called opioid addiction one of the most devastating public health crises facing our nation today. Coming up, tax day just a few weeks away, I'm sorry to say. Tonight, some tips on how to avoid the one thing no one wants, an audit.
Silicon Valley has lost an icon. Former Intel CEO Andy Grove passed away at the age of 79. Considered a central figure in the era of modern computing, he was instrumental in building Intel into the world's largest chip company. Grove was CEO of Intel from 1987 to 1998. He served as chairman until 2005 and was Time's Man of the Year in 1997.
A sobering study on retirement. Only about 20% of Americans are very confident in their financial future. According to the latest annual survey conducted by the Employee Benefit Research Institute, that percentage of workers hasn't changed much in 26 years. In this survey, roughly 4 in 10 workers said they and their spouses have less than $10,000 in savings and investments.
And speaking of investments, it's time to get out those income statements because tax filing season is here. Every Tuesday from now through April 18th, the deadline day, we will tackle a different topic to help you navigate this annual task. Sharon Epperson here to help. Sharon, let's start with the thing that maybe taxpayers worry most about, maybe a little more than they need to. But how can I avoid getting audited besides not cheating?
Exactly. Well, everyone talks about it. How do I avoid an audit? But the reality is less than 1% of Americans are being audited. And it really impacts you if you make a lot of money, actually. If you make over $200,000 a year, you're going to have nearly a 3% chance of getting audited. Make over $1 million, more than a 9% chance of being audited. So you make a lot of money, you have a chance of being audited. Also, if you're self-employed, not that they think you're hiding anything, but your tax return is just a lot more complicated. And so that often can raise a red flag for people. And then also, if you make large charitable donations, make sure you just document everything, because if you don't, that's another red flag.
Right. And if you do fall into that 9%, or even, something a little bit lower than that, but a high-risk group, or if you've been audited before, what can you do to lower your chances of being audited once again?
I hope Donald Trump is listening to this because he says his taxes are getting audited every year.
One of the things you want to do is make sure that you report all your income. So all the W-2s, all the 1099s, know that the IRS is getting copies of that paperwork
and
as well.
Cross-reference,
and they're going to cross-reference and match all those numbers. Some people inadvertently say, I'm going to just lump all my dividend income together, all my investment income together. No. Each account, they want to see how much you have and make sure that you break it down in that way, and then just be accurate with the numbers. That's really is the best thing that you can do. And often when you do your filing online, there are a lot of things that can help you.
Are my chances of being audited higher if I file early or higher if I file later, or no different?
It's much higher if you miss that deadline. That April 18th deadline is critical because a lot of folks, if they miss it, then they also don't pay what they owe if they owe money. So that's another red flag. So even if you file for an extension, make sure that you pay what you owe, because that could be another red flag.
Oh, I see. So even if I get that file 4868, the form that gets me the automatic extension, I know this.
He's got it all down.
I know this stuff.
You know this number.
But you got to pay.
So that April 18th is just going to fly by you. That's why. But anyway, if you do owe money, just know that you have to pay that, even if you file for the extension. That's
Sharon,
key.
great to see you.
Sharon,
Thank you very much. All righty, thanks.
That does it for Nightly Business Report tonight. I'm Sue Herrera. Thanks for joining us.
And I'm Tyler Mathisen. Have a great evening, everybody. We'll see you back here tomorrow night.